when I was working as a women's pastor, the big issue was I was only employed effectively 2 days a week, and yet the workload, I could easily have worked 6 days a week. So what does that look like? Um, how do I work through what the priorities are? And it was really helpful to actually think through, well, what are the priorities for me? How do I delegate? Just what were the issues that meant that I felt that I needed to respond to all those needs? Yeah, so that was exceptionally helpful. Um, Also, the other aspect of that was about finishing up in that role, how to finish well. And I think that, so my husband Sandy and I both had supervision for that, and that was exceptionally helpful. And I think that enabled us to transition out of that ministry exceptionally smoothly. And yeah, we were just exceptionally thankful that in God's kindness, he provided the opportunity of supervision to think that through really well over a long period of time, so that it did happen well. And then in chaplaincy, it's been, I guess that the important thing in chaplaincy is just being able to have a safe place to debrief and think through how I responded in certain situations, and then how I might be able to respond more effectively next time. I think if you don't have the supervision space to do that in, then you either don't process it well, or you process it inappropriately with colleagues or with family members. Mm-hmm. And that's not healthy.
Christine, I've written up a recent session. I'm happy to share the article with you, but maybe I'll just read a couple of paragraphs because it sort of succinctly outlines. So I wrote this after a session with one of my regular supervisees. Gives a bit of an insight to what a session might look like. He's an experienced ordained Anglican, ministering on the east coast of Australia, and was recently called to the scene of a traumatic incident. Actually, 2 people have died. He nominated this issue, setting aside some other pressing matters as the focus for the session. I sense that this incident may have many and complex details, some of which I assume would be highly confidential. And so I guided my supervisee away from merely recounting what had happened, reporting, with the following question. If this incident was to be written up as a case study for students at a training college, what title would you give it? A long pause followed. The supervisee first offered a pithy title for what had transpired. We agreed it was an accurate title for the incident, but I wondered if there was a more creative title for what students could discover by reflecting on this incident in light of my supervisee's experience and what had happened. And the supervisee's second response provided a focused centre of gravity for our time together and the rest of the supervision. And it flowed from this clear focus, even though we're only a few minutes into our session. The supervisee began exploring the incident with a succinct phrase, doing what I can, where I can. That was the phrase he came up with, doing what I can, where I can. Now, towards the end of this session, my supervisee found himself saying the following words about his work. It was profoundly spiritual work. My supervisee now realised his ministry, doing what he could, where he could, had given the people impacted by this traumatic incident words they could borrow. Again, that was his phrase. I don't think it's his original phrase, as a reference to a psalm that he'd given out and some prayers he'd offered. I wondered with him if this was the holy ground of his vocation, but my supervisor countered with an even better suggestion. It's my sweet spot. So I guess that little vignette that happened only fairly recently, it's helping people in ministry, even in the traumatic stuff, the stuff that happens at the coalface, find their sweet spot. And I reckon if we can help people in ministry find their sweet spot, we're all going to be better off as a result. Sorry, that was a bit long, but that's a little vignette.
No, it's lovely, Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Jeff. Wow. I think that's the kind of supervision that I engage with my supervisor. I reflect a lot about what's been happening in my ministry, and I look for a theme, and I look for an image, and I look for a little just sentence, a word or two that captures the whole thing. And often it is an emotive word, like, for example, I am feeling this, I'm feeling frustrated, but it's not the frustration I want to talk about, but it's what's underlying underneath that. So I work hard with my supervisor, nutting out that thing. And it's just like what Jeff said with his supervisee, that at the end of my session with my supervisor, I can come away with a phrase that would encapsulate my whole of 4 weeks of experience in my role, that I can take it to the next 4 weeks. So it is in some ways empowering me to articulate all of multi-layered experiences that and the feelings that I've been experiencing in my ministry into a concise and precise expression, so that I can continue to use that not only for me, but for those who are in a similar situation to me as well. And again, it is about the unseen others here again. And I am being empowered with my supervisor in our supervision space, the power to articulate my experiences. Often it starts with my emotion and energies I felt, but not so much about what happened. It's about how I felt from that, and taking that into, and then we kind of distill all those things into a takeaway, small bits. But that's one thing I hold for the next 4 weeks. I'd hold on to it. And in the same way, I try really hard with my supervisees to really hone into what is that you're taking away from this. More importantly, what are you taking into the next 4 weeks before you? So that's, yeah, there's a connection there. But thank you so much, Jeff. That's beautiful. Yeah.
Thanks, Joseph. It's looking back, reflecting on what happened in the past to inform the future. Anyone else want to share some of the things that they take into supervision, or what comes into your room as a supervisor?
Yeah, Chris, I'll share personally about mine. So I've been in parish or denominational ministry for 14 years, and I've been having supervision for 12 of those. And so from the coalface of ministry, I've taken in a lot of situations where, so I've had, a 4-year-old die and dealing with the grief of that, having been close to the family, and then dealing with the grief for the church family as well. Of having, a pregnant woman suicidal on the roof of her work building, ringing me and telling me that she wants to jump off, and having to deal with those situations. Working through the issues of working in team ministry, so that doesn't always go smoothly. It's just so helpful to have someone who is outside of that, who can help you to check your assumptions and what's going on, and help you to game plan, how to go back into that situation in a healthier way. So many times, I've talked through situations that I've had in pastoring people, just to check that I'm not missing anything, so talking through the type of work that I'm doing, and, are there any gaps? Are there things that I've missed? Because we all have our own ministry blind spots. And I've just found it so incredibly helpful to have someone to talk those things through with as well.
I wouldn't mind just something so run-of-the-mill, but kind of emblematic, I suppose, that I discovered I've been at Bankstown after the Prince of Wales, just for probably 15 months or so. But I discovered early on in my time there that there was one patient who was admitted on the 23rd of December 2020, and a year ticked by, more than a year ticked by. When I became aware of him, I visited him, very regularly, because he didn't have any family or friends visiting him. And I arrived at the hospital just last week, went to his ward, looked for his bed number, couldn't find his name. And often in that circumstance for a hospital chaplain, it's an indicator that the patient has died. That wasn't the case this time round. It was the case, and I checked with the ward clerk, that he'd been discharged, that they'd found a nursing home for him. And I haven't taken that to supervision, but I've taken some similar things to supervision. It's the ephemeral nature of being a hospital chaplain, the fact that you are in the hospital but not of it. You have this confessor role that is so intimate and yet so unneeded and so out of the network of normal communications. No staff member would ever think to communicate to me that this particular fellow had been discharged to a nursing home. Often I find out months later. It's part of the deal, but that's the kind of thing that I would take to supervision to help me reflect theologically about the nature of my role and how I can differently interact with people in that circumstance. What is the learning issue there for me? Where's the edginess? What is it that I'm feeling about this fellow who I developed something of a strange, not chaplain-patient relationship? It was much more than that. And what is the significance of that? So supervision is a vehicle, an opportunity to explore the significance of those kinds of events, those kinds of seemingly so insignificant happenings that can have enormous ramifications and impacts on how we practice our ministry, and more than enough opportunity to reflect theologically.
And apart from unusual, complex and emotionally triggering pastoral situations, I also find that lots of people are bringing issues about the teams that they work with, or their boss, or their, I get amazed sometimes. I think this person's working in what would seem traumatic situations with people in great distress, but they say, oh, that's okay, I can work with that. But what I'm really having trouble with is my co-worker or my boss or the board of something. And that's what we spend a lot of time focusing on. Also, sometimes it's the processes, organisational processes, that people find really frustrating. It might be clashing with their values, or their just the amount of time taken in doing something like spiritual assessments in aged care facilities. How there's a conflict between doing that and spending time with the actual residents. And there's some of the things that come up a lot for me with my supervisees.